Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about topography and contour notes. This hopefully won't be fairly quick. All right. And then we'll have a video on how to actually do a contour lines. Topography is basically just the shape of the Earth's surface, okay? And whether it's flat, is it hilly, and basically it's based on altitude or how far it is above sea level. All right. A topographic map then or topo map for short, is just a map that uses contour lines to map the Earth's surface. All right, and trying to show you where those things are on the surface of the Earth. All right. Based on the elevation or altitude. Generally, we talk about altitude if we're talking about how far we are above the ground. Talk about the altitude, or if it's a mountain, how tall it is above sea level. We say it's elevation. So in the air, if you were in an airplane, you talk about your altitude, cruising height at altitude, whatever, and so many feet. And elevation is generally how far a mountain is or something above sea level if you're on the ground. But technically, it's the same thing. It's just how high are you above sea level. All right. Now, the relief has to do with the difference between the highest spot on the map and the lowest spot on the map. So in other words, how much does the elevation change on this particular map that you're looking at? So you'd have to find the lowest number, and you'd have to find the highest number in order to calculate the relief. All right, here's an example of a topographic map. All right, and you can see these lines. These are the contour lines. Okay, and this one is about looks like 3,600. Okay, and then the one right here would be 3,000. Looks like 800. So then you calculate how much each of these goes up. They go up by 20 feet each one, or so forth. Okay, and for example, here's 3,300. The highest one is up here, 4,266. So if you subtracted those, that would give you the relief from the highest point on the map to the lowest. Okay. Now, each line, like I said, goes up a certain number of feet depending on the map. It may be like 50 feet, could be 100 feet, or more or less, just depending on the particular map. All right. I believe this one goes up 20 feet, so this would be 3,700, then be 3,800, 3,900, and 4,000 there. Okay, so each one goes up by a couple hundred. Okay, but anyhow, that distance between each line is called the contour interval. All right, and so if we go back here, the contour lines are just lines that connect areas on the map that have the same elevation. All right. And the distance, let me just scoot this down a little bit real quick here. The change in elevation between one line and the other is called the contour interval. Okay, and that's what we're showing on there. The one had, I believe, we said 20 feet between them. Okay, hachures are dashes on a line that point inside. Okay, and we'll talk more about those in just a second. All right, let's go back to our other one out here. Hang on, let me go back to another station here. PowerPoint. Can click on it. There we go. Okay. So, for example, you notice that these are circles up here. Okay. These mean that they're increasing. And if you look at it, we've got 3,600 here, we've got 4,000 here. So obviously they're increasing as you go up. But in particular, we know they're increasing as you go up because they're going to be when they get to circles. Circles are either going to be peaks at the very top of something, or they're going to be a low spot. Okay, if they're a low spot, they will have hachures. Okay, this, for example, was a piece cut out of a map, but this is a pond. Okay, a pond area. You can see how it shrivels up a little bit, but because the line has the little hachure marks, those little dashes on them, that tells us that the pond is going down or getting lower. Okay, and so this is a lower elevation on these particular contour lines, and that tells us it's a low spot. On the other hand, if you see a circle in the middle and doesn't have the hachures, then you're assuming that is a peak, okay, where it's getting taller. Okay, now there's some other rules about contour lines that we need to know. That's kind of their general terminology. But let's go to this one, just rules for contour lines, okay? Basically, a couple things. One, contour lines cannot cross. Okay, it's impossible for two contour lines to cross and have the same elevation. You can't be at 3,000 feet and at 4,000 feet at the same place. Okay, it's either one or it's the other. All right. Now, as they get closer together, they are steeper and steeper, and so that can look very close to overlapping, but usually they would not. Technically, if you had a straight vertical wall, then yes, they could be on top of each other, and then they could overlap, but they certainly would not cross. They would just overlap at that point. Okay, if we look at this one here, which is fairly steep, you notice out here the lines are farther apart. As you get up closer here, they're getting closer and closer together. Okay, and this is part of Enchanted Rock, which is a great place for people to do rock climbing and stuff. And you can see how steep some of these are. The lines are so close together you can't distinguish between them anymore. Okay, and so we're talking almost vertical surfaces there. All right, but they'll get close together, but they should never overlap, or certainly not cross. They may overlap and be stacked on top of each other, but usually not, and they will never cross. Okay, because basically, if this is the 3,600 foot line, that means anything less than that is going to be lower, and anything to the right of that over here is going to be higher than that. It goes in between that, and anywhere that's exactly 3,600 is going to be on that contour line. All right. Now, anytime they cross a stream, they will form a V, or if it's a gentle stream, it may be more of a U, but it will always point upstream, which is uphill. Okay. So, for example, let's get back over here on the example map. All right. When we see these little ridges pointing up, we know this is upstream or uphill, and there's at least a gully running down here. Okay, now there may not be, so the gully, it would come down here and run through there. Okay, here's some more. Here's some V's pointing up, so this would be a gully. Here's a gully, ravines. In other words, this is on top of a mountain up here, and then down the sides, this is where all the water would run down in the gullies. All right. Now, if there is actually a stream that's active all the time, hang on a second, you would actually see, for example, here are some very long U-shape that's going up this direction. The whole thing could be considered a giant U-shape. There's also little side ones up here, gullies that drain into it. But this little dotted line here, there's a line, dot, 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 line, dot, dot, dot. This is called an intermittent stream, meaning, once again, it'll have water in it some time of the year, but it won't at other times of the year. Okay, and so that would be an example of a stream. But as you see these U's or V's going up off the sides, that would be the ravines or gullies that would feed into that one. All right. All right, the next line says contour lines cannot split. You can't have one line that divides into two that go in different directions. Okay, it's one line, it can only stay one line, and eventually it will come and connect back to itself. Okay, now that may or may not be shown on the map. Okay, so for example, here on this one, we can see that this contour line goes all the way around and eventually connects back to itself. These other ones, for example, they go off the map. But we would assume that at some point they're going to go all the way back around and hook up to the same line. If this one's one less than that, it's going to go all the way. You can see maybe a little bit of it here, and eventually it's going to hook up back to this line over here. Okay, so all contour lines will eventually hook back to themselves, even though they may not actually do that on the map that you're looking at, but they will do that eventually somewhere. Okay, if we could see the whole thing. Number 5, contour lines forming a circle represent a high point, or if they have hachures, then they are a depression or a low point. And we've kind of talked about that already a little bit, but basically this would be a peak. Now, how big a peak depends on the change in elevation. It may just be a slight rise or a little rounded area that's a little bit taller, a little mound. Okay, in this case, the hachures tell us this one's going down, so it's just a shallow spot. It gets higher as you go up on the sides. It gets lower as you go into this low spot. So this is where water would collect. In this case, the little dotted line shows where this might be full of water. I believe the solid line here showing the actual pond, how big it was at the time that they did this actual contour map. That's basically the rules for how contour lines work, and hopefully you've learned a little bit about contour intervals and other terminology, hashers, and so forth that go along with that, elevation, and so on. There's also another video which will show you how to do the worksheet and learn how to draw contour lines. We will also talk about that when we meet in class. Have an excellent day.